You are listening to the 5 a.m. podcast, and today is your day. Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast. I'm your host, Michael Klassen, and today I'm joined by a man whose life's journey reads like several lifetimes packed into one. Lawrence Dunning was born in England, earned his BA in history and his MBA in finance from the University of Exeter, and then blazed a trail through the derivative pits of Amsterdam, Wall Street, and the Chicago Board of Trade. By the age of 29, he had achieved what many spend a lifetime pursuing, becoming a self-made millionaire. But what makes Lawrence truly fascinating isn't just his financial success, it's what he chose to do next. Recognizing a narrow window to pursue his passion for combat sports, he made the bold decision to step away from trading, giving away his company to embark on a journey that would lead him to win the Chicago Golden Gloves, compete as a professional MMA fighter, and earn his black belt in jiu-jitsu. Life then took Lawrence on a humbling ride when at 35, his net worth evaporated after a series of financial missteps during his athletic pursuits. But he was undaunted. He reinvented himself in the real estate world, founding the Dunning team in Chicago, which specializes in ground-up developments and building investment portfolios. Today, Lawrence continues to teach and compete in jiu-jitsu, recently becoming the first jiu-jitsu black belt to run marathons on all 7 continents, and yes, that includes Antarctica. He hosts the Enter the Lionheart podcast, exploring excellence among entrepreneurs, athletes, and intellectuals, and has published the book, The Forgotten Asset Class on Real Estate Investing. Yet with all these accomplishments, Lawrence counts raising his young son Victor alongside with his wife Jen as his greatest achievement. Lawrence, it's an honor to have you with us. Welcome to the 5 a.m. podcast.
Michael, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and what a great introduction. I'm beaming with pride. You make it sound so great, so thank you.
Yes. Well, I worked with an older fellow once, and he's like, Michael, you got to talk about your wins a little bit more. I was like, well, it's kind of hard, but okay, I could try. Owen, sure. But thanks for that boost. But it's good to take stock of the journey that the good Lord has brought us down through life. And there's been pitfalls and roadblocks and traffic accidents and train derailments, but yet here we are. So I want to ask you then, you achieved this millionaire status, which a lot of people would be thinking, man, that's like you can hit it on cruise control and stop after that. You were 29 years old, and I know from having some great profits in my 20s, you kind of lose a little bit you get a detachment from what not necessarily hard work, but what the value of a dollar is almost. How did that feel to you? And then was there some surprises that came along with reaching that financial milestone?
You know, that's such a great question, because when you were talking, I was thinking back to how I felt about money. And you're right. At a certain point, I remember when I first started trading, one of my bosses told me, he said, it looks like ones and zeros, but it is actually real money. And it's hard to forget when you're trading and you're dealing with all these big trades. It's just ones and zeros on bits of paper, but it is real money behind it. And I remember the feeling I had when I quit trading is I actually loved what I did. And I had friends say, like, why, you work for yourself, you have your own trading company, you make money, you work, I think it was 7:30 to 2 were the hours, great hours. You're done at 2:30. Why would you give that up? And I realized that money's great, but the big thing that it gave me is it gave me the freedom to step back and say, what can I do now that I can't do when I get older? And I realized that I had a very small window. I was like an amateur martial artist, and I wanted to see how far I could take it. And I thought, well, I could be trading at 80 years old, but I can't do it. I can't be a professional athlete probably past 40 or something like that. So it made the decision. It just gave me this freedom that I can pursue what I really want to now, because I always feared about being this old man, maybe with a lot of zeros in my bank account, but I'd have regrets. And the one great thing that happened, Michael, is I made every mistake a young person can make. I went through the 2009 crash, and I had a couple of partnerships with business ventures with people who screwed me over. So I lost a whole bunch of money. And during that time, when I was fighting professionally, I kept living like I was making all this money. So of course my net worth went down. And But what's so great about making money when you're young is that you realize that you can you realize you can do it. You have the self-confidence. And then when I changed career, it was incredibly humbling. In the first year of real estate, I probably made what I could make in one good day of trading. So it's really humbling. But the great thing, I always try and spread this message. The great thing about going through tough times is that it gives you a resilience and a confidence that when you're at a real low point, the main trajectory is just going to be up. And then as soon as, if you're a father and you have kids, I'm actually so glad that I went through all the mistakes I made, because it's going to be great lessons I can pass on to my son. I think if I had just, I love I love the idea of Bitcoin as a decentralized currency outside the banking system, but I only discovered it relatively late. And I always think if someone had told me in 2012 or 2014, hey, put a couple of $1,000s in Bitcoin, and now I was worth $100 million of Bitcoin, I think I would have missed out on so much growth. I wouldn't be the person I am today. I'd probably be miserable. So it's just, I love spreading that message, because I think anyone that's listening to this that's going through a tough time, I find it's a very optimistic message. And something I've noticed with a lot of people that we look up to, these public figures that are incredibly successful and they're on the mountaintop, when they look back at their life and their career, a lot of the time they think back to the period where they didn't know how they were going to pay the rent the next month, and they were borrowing money off friends to pay the bills. But that was they're the memories they prize the most, when they're in the trenches struggling. So I think that's such a good message to tell people is, hey, don't wait until get success to be happy. Be happy now and have the confidence that you're somehow going to figure it out. But don't wait to be happy. Be happy now, because we're never going to get these days back.
Man, that's true. And I love talking about trading. I've enjoyed, whether trading stocks or crypto, whatever the case might be, so many teachable moments, some great wins, some great losses. And we got to say great losses, because we realize that that's how we win. That's how you can man, when you have some great wins, like you're making, I don't know, a couple $1,000s in a trade that took you like 10 minutes or something like that, and you do lose a little bit of a detachment, like your boss was saying, of this is actually real money. But maybe we can talk a little bit about those pitfalls, that they're actually so valuable. For my wife and I to be able to look back on some really hard moments just because of what we were building or going through. And you look back now and you think, man, I'm glad I actually have that story to share with someone who's going through that now, to
Yes.
encourage them now. So can you talk a little bit about those teachable moments, and maybe how, like you're saying, not necessarily with your son, but maybe with some other people that you coach, uh, that you've been able to say, hey, I see what you're doing there.
There's a great expression by Carlos Gracie, who was one of the founders of Jiu-Jitsu. And he said, when you compete, you either win or you learn. And I love that, because what it's doing is it's reframing the fact that when I go in a competition, it's only positive outcomes. Either if I win, it means whatever, my training paid off and I executed what I wanted to. But if I lose, I didn't really lose. I actually won, because I learned this really priceless, valuable lesson. And so I take that same mindset with everything in business. I recently, so it's funny because I rebuilt myself from having all this money trading, and then I made all these mistakes. I like to say I made every mistake a young person can make, pretty much. And then when I rebuilt myself in real estate, come 2020, when the world shut down with COVID, I had 9 developments of multi-unit buildings in Chicago with a partner. And the partner basically decided to screw me over and declare bankruptcy. And then I was tied up in 4 years of lawsuits. I lost a whole bunch of money. I didn't get anything back. And I wasted all this money on legal fees and all this stress. And I was just thinking about, actually, on the drive to Chicago today, I was driving to the city, and I was thinking, I'm so grateful to him. Like, I don't want to have any animosity to anyone who screwed me over, because it's just wasted energy. They don't care, but it's going to affect me. But I don't even want to forgive him. I actually want to be grateful to him, because what he did by doing that is he forced me to dream bigger. So it's just, you can find these, it's kind of a cliche. It's kind of like when you're a teenager, or you start dating, and you have a heartbreak, and your mom says to you, oh, there's plenty more fish in the sea. You don't really want to hear that right then,
No,
but it
not at
is,
all.
but it's true. And it's the same thing with failures and bad decisions you make. There is always something positive you can draw from it. And I'm so happy that I went through that with that contractor, because I've grown so much as a person. And I think even though, again, in the time, there were some moments that were really miserable, but I'm so happy it happened. And when you have that mindset now, it's it's really wonderful when you look back and you're grateful for all the tough times, because as long as you realize that there are things that are going to force you to grow, because we only grow when we're forced out of our comfort zone, then we know that moving forward, I know there's going to be struggles I'm going to encounter, but I have the confidence. I think Nassim Taleb, he uses the word anti-fragility, which means that you're going to get stronger from difficulties as opposed to let them break you. And so I've developed that mental resistance and grit where I'm like, okay, it doesn't matter what happens. I know I'll be okay. Because I know it's not going to be smooth sailing, but I know I'll be able to handle the difficult waves and the storms that are coming. And I think that's such a lovely feeling to have.
It is. And it's so much confidence, and it's such a different mindset shift. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. 5am Podcast is brought to you in part by mkci.ca, a certified member of the Autodesk Developer Network. MKCI helps companies maximize their AutoCAD, Inventor, Navisworks, and other design software investments. Their innovative products will streamline your workflow and boost your productivity. Visit mkci.ca today. Thank you for your support of 5am Podcast. Coming from a Christian perspective, we have that Bible verse that says to count it all joy. But we get to count it all joy because we know that those people that did us wrong, we can actually thank them for helping us, something that we can relate to jujitsu training. I love the time that I took jujitsu. I used to say I took jujitsu before it was cool. I was living in a city and there was some police officers. I knew one of the guys in their circle and they had a dojo and they were trained in jujitsu. And so I got an invitation to hang out with the guys. There's like so many metaphors, but can you talk about some of those things that you've taken away from those combat sports, how they've helped you with business decisions?
I think the biggest appeal to me from combat sports was I've always been a very nice person, and my friends used to joke that I'm too nice to be a fighter. But for me, I never had any animosity or anger towards my opponent. And actually, the word competition, it comes from two Greek words, com and patia. And what it means is to come together. And that's why I always saw competition as it forces you to grow. You need a competitor to be forced to be your best. And I think there's a saying like no track world record has ever been on a training track. It's always, at the Olympics, at the World Championships, when you have all that pressure, because pressure creates diamonds. So for me, I love fighting because I love the science of it. And jiu-jitsu is, they call it human chess. And MMA is just jiu-jitsu with boxing and wrestling, and it's even more complicated. So I always saw the human chess aspect. And for me, it was always very scary. And I think if you do something that's scary, it doesn't matter what the domain is, and you get through it, you realize that fear is there, but it's not going to stop you. It's not going to freeze you. And they say fear either makes cowards or heroes, right? We all have the hero and the coward feel the same thing. They feel the fear, but their response to it is what differentiates them. And I think for me, the biggest thing I got was when the scariest thing I could imagine. I mean, I haven't been to war. War is a lot more scary. But the scariest thing for me was you're in a pair of Lycra shorts and little gloves in front of thousands of people, and you've got some guy your weight who's trained, who's trying to take you from your consciousness. It's so scary that I think putting myself willingly, I wasn't doing it for money. I was already wealthy, right? So I did it for just the pure challenge of it because it was so difficult. I think having been through that, now I can spend the rest of my life where I'm not scared of things, or I'll rephrase that. There's an element of fear. I feel fear every single day. There's difficult calls I don't want to make. There's a difficult conversation with my wife. There's, I taught a class of jiu-jitsu today and I was rolled. I didn't get the great night's sleep. I've got a shoulder injury and I trained really hard. And I was nervous before. I was like, how am I going to get through this? So it's different levels, but you have fear in everything every day. And I think fear, it freezes a lot of people. A lot of people, they don't reach their potential because they let their fears stop them and hold them back. And I think the biggest lesson I got was, it's scary to change career in your mid-30s. It's scary to be a beginner again when you've been really competent at something and you have to relearn. And now the older and hopefully wiser I get, I realize that I'm never going to let my fears stop me. And we use the jiu-jitsu analogy. You start off as a white belt and then you get darker belts and you eventually get your black belt. And I think I want to keep putting white belts on where I'm a beginner at something and I'm on that steep part of the learning curve, because I think that's what makes a rich life is you're always growing, you're always challenging yourself. So for me, I became a parent at 41. I was a white belt parent. I was terrified. I thought that being a parent was going to be the end of my fun. I thought, even if it was a subconsciously, I realized I was really depressed when I became a parent because I just thought like my fun is over. I've been doing all these cool things and it's going to end now. But yet today I have my son is going to be 5 in a few months. I'm the happiest I've ever been. I'm 10 times happier, but I didn't know that. I had to put a new belt on and start a new journey. And then it's real challenging, but everything we're proud of is through hard things. So I think just trying to not let fear stop you. And it's so refreshing when you hear people. There's so many famous figures that we look up to, and then when you talk, you hear them talk, and almost every single one of them had imposter syndrome. They were nervous. They didn't think they could do it. Worried about what other people thought. They didn't feel competent, but yet they persevered in spite of that. And I think that's the message that I want to share to people, because I don't want people. It's so easy to look at a complete finished product and say, oh, it's okay for them. They had it figured out. And it's so nice to remember that, hey, they had to start from the bottom and they maybe struggled and they had self-confidence issues and problems and roadblocks, and they persevered for years and years and years, and they're rising up. And then we see them at the top as a finished product and we say, oh, must be easy for them. So almost everyone that you look up to has gone through so much struggle to get there. And that's a really refreshing message, because then we're not scared of starting again as a beginner at something.
Exactly. That's right. That's like a reporter going to a musician, the head of a band or something, and saying, wow, how do you feel about your overnight success? And the musician says, overnight success? How about this is the culmination of 20 years of bar fights and people not showing up and performing to empty rooms. So
Exactly.
there's so much. Can you talk maybe a little bit about those dark nights of the soul that lead to bright, shiny days?
Yeah, I mean, even if I look back on every step of my journey, so I basically had 3 big careers, I would say. I would say trading, fighting, and then in real estate. And I could look at the start of all of them. I remember when I first started trading, I was on the trading floor in Amsterdam. And we had this thing where I would help the traders out all day. And then when the market closed, the guys at my company would pretend to be brokers. And me and the other new trainee traders, we were called, we would pretend to be traders, and we would do what's called mock trading, where the traders would shout out markets as if we're brokers, and we had to do the math and figure out if it's a buy or a sell, and see if we would have traded, if we'd have made money. And I remember I was kind of an introverted, quieter kid. And I was thinking at the time I was about 23. And one of the traders, older guy, great guy, Max from Australia, still remember his name, he pulled me aside and he said, what is wrong with you? He's like, you've got to be more aggressive. You got to be louder. You got to be listening to 5 people screaming at the same time. And I said, I can't do that. And he said, you have to do it. And he kind of gave me this tough love conversation, and it forced me to come out of my shell much more. And so I was definitely not a natural trader, but by being in that pressure cooker, when I first started trading in Chicago, I think I was probably 23, just turning 24. The average age of the trading floor was probably 35. They were all older. It was like a boys' club. A lot of them were 2nd, 3rd generation traders, and they hated me. I'm the guy with the English accent from an English company competing against the local guys. They hated me. They used to talk badly of me every single day, say these little comments. And it was like a real tough environment to work in. But because I persevered, eventually, as soon as they realized I was competent, and then I ended up leaving my company and started my own company, and they all came up to me after and they said, Lawrence, just so you know, all the negative stuff, it was never directed at you. It wasn't personal. We just hated your company, the way they did business. We love you. And now you're working for yourself. You're one of us, one of the boys. But when you go through a year and a half of every single day, you're in a pit of 50, 60 guys and they're all talking negative about you all day, every day. It's an awful work environment, but you get through that, and there's the other side. And then I can look at that. It's exactly the same when I started in real estate. I was used to being this really good trader. I was a professional fighter, and I start at the bottom of the ladder. I'm selling these places. I'm barely making commissions. I'm doing rentals that don't even waste my time, and people are blowing me off and not showing up to appointments. But I had this mindset. I was like, the first year, I don't care about money. I want to learn the business. I want to be an expert in real estate. I know if I'm an expert, the money will come. I'll have that long-term time horizon. So I think I had that with every one of my careers and fighting too. When I first started, I wasn't a natural fighter. I don't think I'm a good natural athlete. But the one thing I have is I'll outwork anybody. I'll be disciplined. I'll not drink for a year. I'll eat the perfect food. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll be there every day. I'll outwork you. So I think, I don't think anything that I've achieved was easy. And that's why I'm so proud of it. But also anything that I got good at took a long time, and I had to go through the process of being a beginner and just having, like I think you mentioned earlier about having a growth mindset. That is the most important thing. And I think that's actually, if you look at really good natural athletes, that they just kind of, maybe from as kids, they just took to things quickly and they were always, the best in their class or whatever it was. When those kind of people, when they encounter difficulties, a lot of them crumble because they're not used to persevering. They're used to just being these really talented people. I found it in my experience, it wasn't the best athletes that tend to do really well. It was the pretty good athletes who then also had the good work ethic. Combined, they would outwork the people with maybe more just raw talent. And I think that's another great lesson. You can apply that to business. Say I'm starting out in business, and there's people that have all these connections. They're from a rich family. I don't have anything like that. So they might be starting with more than me, but that doesn't mean that I can't supersede them with hard work and building relationships on the ground level and just being consistent, month after month, year after year. So I think we can apply these same kind of analogies to almost everything. And that's actually I think about the themes of my different careers, and it's these same general themes what does it take to be successful? I think it's the same themes in almost any field that you can point to.
Yes. Yes. Well, I want to talk to you about Chicago and the Golden Gloves. Uh, what what came into your mind that you wanted to break into the world of boxing? And just before you answer that, I will say I've had a few friends that I grew up with. I still remember putting on the boxing gloves with my friend Dennis Paul when I was probably like 8 or 9 years old. They were his grandfather's boxing gloves, and then I had other friends as I became a teenager, got a little bit older, and they were in the ring, they were boxing, and uh, that's a bit of a subculture to enter into.
I didn't even mean to get into boxing. I went
Okay.
to this jiu-jitsu gym in Chicago, and the
Okay.
gym shared there was a space with mats for jiu-jitsu, and there was a boxing ring. And the coach, his name's Coach Joe, he came up to me the first day. I just came in to check it out. I just moved to Chicago. And he came up to me and he said, "You've got the jawline of a fighter. If you train with me, I'll make sure you win the Golden Gloves." I fell in love with boxing, and for a while I nearly quit jiu-jitsu. I was so all in with boxing, and it took me three attempts to win the Golden Gloves. I had a couple of what I think were tough decision losses, but in my weight class it was always 20, 25 people. It was a big bracket, and I actually won the Golden Gloves when I was still trading in the pit. So it was really hard. I just remember being so exhausted. I would get up at 5, work from 6 to 3, 6 to 4, take a nap, go straight to the boxing gym, get home at 9 or 10. I had no life. That was all I did: work and boxing. But I love the sweet science and the history. They've actually moved it now. But the Chicago Golden Gloves was held in St. Andrew's gym back when I won it. And that was the same gym that Cassius Clay, as a young man, he came up from Louisville and he won the Chicago Golden Gloves. Actually, same weight as me, 178. He was smaller when he was a kid. And there was just so much history in that gymnasium. And it was incredible. There would be pro fighters that I saw on TV in England that would come, that my coach introduced me to. And like you said it perfectly. It is such a subculture. And being a guy from England, I wasn't really exposed to the Chicago boxing culture. It was so different. And I've got some really unique friends from it, and just lifelong brothers through boxing. It was even now I have such fond memories of those years. It's next year will be 20 years since I won, 2006. So shows I'm getting old, but it's just I had such fond memories of boxing. And boxing, I just think the intensity of it. A jiu-jitsu match is anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. Boxing in amateurs is 3 2-minute rounds, and those 2 minutes are so furious. I remember I would train so hard. And every single fight I had about 25 amateur boxing fights. Every single fight I had, I was always, the first 10 seconds, I was always like, wow, the speed and the intensity is crazy. And every single time I had that thought, it doesn't matter how hard you train, it is just so intense when you're actually competing. So that was incredible years. And I think, again, coming back to overcoming fear, you know, you and the opponent, other side of the ring, looking at each other, and the bell rings, and you go at it, and you got 2 furious minutes. I think that was really good for my character development as well. And the one thing about that is, I noticed that on the trading floor, that trading was a very stressful job, and so there was a couple of different ways people would deal with the stress. And some of the older guys that were in the, I was in my early 20s at the time, mid 20s. Some of the older guys for me, they were still young. They were probably mid 30s, late 30s. They would be good. They would go to work, they'd make their money, they would go home and hang out with their families. They were great family men, great people. Then you would have the people that they would deal with the stress by drugs and alcohol. And there was a lot of those. And you saw some really sad stories about people that ruined their lives with drugs and alcohol. And for me, I needed a release too. And I was like, okay, boxing is going to be my release. I was single. I threw everything into boxing. So it worked perfectly. I had the stress of work, and then I would release the stress in the boxing gym, in the evening. And the good thing was when they actually wrote an article about me when I was fighting in one of the Golden Gloves early on, because when I went to sign up, they saw me. I was dressed nicely. I'm European. There was a reporter there, and she heard me talking, and she said, I got to do an interview with you. Like, what are you doing here? And I said, yeah, I'm from England. What do you do? I work at the Chicago Board of Trade. She's like, you are not the typical guy in the Golden Gloves. Like, so they did a story about me. So then I was in the local papers, the Chicago Tribune. So one of the brokers, when he saw I was a boxer, suddenly no more talking badly about me in the pit. Everyone respected me. Everyone was nice to me. Because on the trading floor, all these guys that were good traders, they would try to bully and intimidate. But suddenly, when they realized that I was actually a real fighter, that wouldn't work on me. So suddenly, they didn't really know how to handle me. It was like this overnight, my life changed, So that was really wonderful too, just to get the respect of your peers through combat sports.
Man, that's great. And so many places we could go in this conversation, but seeing as how we both appreciate and enjoy the effort that goes into boxing and jujitsu and other martial arts, I think maybe not every child. I get it. Okay, I'm not preaching to anybody here, but the value that comes from when you first enter that dojo of having to show that sign of respect and understanding that your dojo, whatever that matting is, it's built on the shoulders of giants. Can you talk about some of those core values that you have now that you learned because of entering those dojos and learning is not so much the fighting and the smacking somebody in the head, it's that quality of person that you're learning to be.
Thank you so much for asking that. It was actually so we recorded this on Wednesday. On Monday, I took my 4-year-old to his first jiu-jitsu class, and I put on his little jiu-jitsu outfit. He's so cute. He's got his little white belt, and he was too shy to go in the class. He actually just there was 2 mat spaces, and he stayed. I kept saying, do you want to join the class? My friend is the gym owner. He's actually my neighbor. It's about 20 minutes away, but the owner lives, he's my neighbor in Indiana. And he said, listen, it's okay. He said some kids cry for the first few. He's got to get used to it. So just let him play. So I just let him play. And I realized what a special day that was. It's like, I've been waiting, like, when do I start him with martial arts? And my wife got a bit upset because I made a throwaway comment. I said, the greatest gift in my life has been martial arts. And she said, wait, I thought I was your greatest gift, or your son. And I said, no, I don't mean that. I mean, I would never have had the confidence to approach you if it were. Martial arts has given me everything. And I started just before I turned 13, and I grew up watching these 80s movies with these larger than life characters. And I realized that if you want to be a force for good, you can't be weak. You have to be strong. And I wanted to be a strong person who could stand up against bullies and protect people. And that was always my motivation. But I realized that it gave me so much. Martial arts as a kid is visual demonstration of work ethic, achieving success. So like, you get a growth mindset because you start off with a white belt and you train hard, and then the belt slowly changes as you become more competent, but it's hard work. So I think traditional martial arts, combat sport martial arts, I love all of them. I have so much love. I've done many different styles. I've got several different black belts in different styles, and I've been doing it, if I started at 12 and I'm 36, so it's been 46, it's been 34 years. So nearly 3.5 decades pretty much of martial arts. It's been the biggest constant of my life. And I think the brotherhood you get, the camaraderie, the discipline, the intellectual challenge of it. I'm an intellectual person. And if you look at fighting, some people might see boxing as brutality. They say it takes 10 years to create a 10-round fighter. Like, the subtleties in high-level boxing are just incredible. And the same with jiu-jitsu. I've been doing jiu-jitsu now, started at 18, so it's coming up to 30 years. It's going to, 20, nearly 29 years now. And I've been a black belt now for, it's going to be 9 in December. And I learn every day. I was teaching today and I made a connection that I never thought about before. So every time I train, it's so complicated intellectually that you can keep innovating and changing. But I think for a child, boy or girl, to have the confidence to defend yourself physically, I think is priceless. And I train with some women who, some of my female students, they went through some tough times. And when you saw when they first started training, they kind of looked down at the floor, they slunched their shoulders. Now they walk in proud and they stand straight and they carry themselves differently. And then you see the same with, these guys. They're just, they're so nice because they don't have demons they carry. A lot of people repress emotions and they carry around these demons. After jiu-jitsu, you have a bunch of tough guys who are the sweetest people. We were chatting today in the locker room when we were changing, laughing, joking. It's just positive energy because you've got out that aggression and the energy. So I just think for little boys, I think so many problems we diagnose as ADHD and things like that, lack of concentration. It's because it's not natural for a little boy to be in a classroom for hours, in the day. I think having a physical outlet is so important. And so I really think if there's one, it's as a parent, it's interesting because I get to shape my son's influences, but I don't want him. I want him to develop his own path. I don't want to be one of those parents that forces things and they will live vicariously through their kids. But I also know the gift that martial arts gave me, and I want to give him that gift. So that's kind of why I was waiting. I didn't want to start him too young. Some people at 3 years old have their kids training. He's nearly 5, but I really want to give him that gift, and I really think it's one of the biggest gifts you can give a child. I truly, in my heart, believe it.
Yes. Well, and speaking as someone who was a son himself, when you get to do some of those formative things that that your father grew from and really appreciated, boy, it's like you have that extra bond with your father and the generations. And I know in my family, both sides, like those generational lines were talked about a lot and very important of from one generation to the next of improving the family, improving the world. Man, it's just it's great to hear that because hopefully people who are listening are saying, I never thought of that for my young children, but what a valuable way to learn life. And even if somebody hates something, the learning that persistence and sticking through it, and you even kind of alluded to that in the hard time that guys gave you of learning in the trading pits. But, you know what? I wanna ask about your book. And well, let's switch over to kind of that finance side, uh, of life and the currencies, and that's something that you've talked about is those different currencies. There's money, there's time, there's health.
Mm.
Could you elaborate on how these currencies really interact and how people should maybe balance their investments in these currencies across that, let's say, that basket of funds?
Mm. Well, okay, let's use this analogy. So let's use three. We'll use money, we'll use time, and we'll use health. So when you're young, you have all the time in the world, you're young, and typically you tend to be healthy, but most people don't have any money. And then when you're old, you're out of time and your health tends to be at the end of its rope as well. But most people are most wealthy towards the end of their life. And then in the middle, you're kind of juggling them all. As you're losing time and health, you're gaining money. So it's this tricky interplay and balance between, for me, there's nothing more sad than someone that, I was, when I lived in downtown Chicago, a couple of, I had friends in the building that were law firms. They were trying to make partner and they did not have a life. All they did is work. They sacrificed their youth because they were thinking, if I can just get to partner, then I'm going to make X amount a year and I'll be set for life. I think that's the wrong approach. And I think a lot of people realize that if you chase money at the expense of your youth and your health, there'll come a time when you're going to regret it. But at the same time, I also believe that money is really important for a flourishing life. And I don't mean it in the sense of, some people want money so they can buy flashy cars and have expensive watches and take nice vacations. I like taking nice vacations, but my car's, I think, 6 years old. I don't care. I'll keep it for another 6 years. I'm not too, I live in a nice house, but that's not because I want to be showy. It's because I want a nice place to raise a family. And so I think financial literacy is really important. And I'm fond of spreading the message that we have to invest in assets. I call my book The Forgotten Asset Class because I come from a finance background, and they talk about investing in bonds, in stocks, in gold, having some cash reserves. They don't really talk about real estate because real estate is very different. And a lot of these finance programs are kind of, they're taught in colleges in America, in Europe, in Australia. They teach the same financial principles. And there's so many amazing things that you get through investing in real estate. But I don't care what you invest in. You got to find what works for you. But just having some financial literacy when you're young and making smart decisions, your future self is going to be really grateful. But I think it's not at the expense of everything. And I think that's what makes it so challenging is we live in times right now where we've had the highest inflation since the 70s, the last 18 months. And a lot of people are struggling, and I do okay, but I'm still blown away by my credit card bills on the one my wife uses for groceries. You can't believe how expensive things are. And so I really believe in the Charlie Munger approach to money. And Charlie Munger was Warren Buffett's partner, and he became a billionaire through working with Warren. But he always said, money was never my goal. I just wanted enough money to have financial freedom and to do the things I want to do and to give back. He was very altruistic. He said, I just kind of overshot the mark and he ended up becoming a billionaire. But I kind of always had that approach where I think financial literacy is really important. And it's something that I can't wait to start teaching my son. They say actually as a business owner, because I own my real estate business, I should actually have him on the payroll so I can start getting him into an IRA. I can start, getting the write-offs, but also I can start actually making him work because I want him to learn about the value of money, and you're trading time for money. And if you're more efficient, you're going to get more money for the same amount of time. So I think a lot of us have inbuilt opinions of money based on when they're young, based on your youth. So when I grew up, my dad was a wonderful father, but I realized he had a very negative view of money. And he grew up after Second World War in England. His dad was actually fled from Germany just before the Second World War. So he grew up with a dad who didn't speak great English. He had a minimum wage job, and he had 4 siblings. So they grew up very, very humbly. And then he did okay for himself. He had a middle class life, but I think there was something, he always had this negative view on money, and he always kind of looked down on money. And he would have given me that view of money if it wasn't for my uncle, who was an incredibly successful photographer and entrepreneur, traveled the world, taking these incredible photos. He won all these awards. And he bought me a book when I was about 10 years old called How to Be a Millionaire. And it was just, he always gave me that inspiration that I want to be like my uncle. I want to work for myself. I want to travel. I want to have enough money to live a good life. And so I think it's so important to see where your views of money come from, and to realize that money is it's a tool and it's an amplifier. And if you're broke and happy and you become very wealthy, you're probably going to be wealthy and happy. And if you're broke and miserable and you get a lot of money, you're probably going to be wealthy and miserable. It's not going to make you happy, but it's a tool that if you use it to buy back your time and freedom and make sure that you have time to look after your health, and maybe you can do, altruistic, charitable things, you're going to have you're going to get a lot back from that. And that's the way I like to see money. I like to see money as a tool that I want to learn how to use that tool as well as I can. And then, I know money's alone is not going to make me happy, but it's going to give me the space to do things that will make me happy. And I've been rich and I've been broke, and I can tell you being broke is a lot less fun because, it's like when you're hungry, nothing else matters. You just want to eat. And when you have no money, it's hard to enjoy anything when you have the stress of, how am I going to pay my bills next month? I've been there, and so what was really interesting though, Michael, is I was so lucky to realize before I was 30 that money alone doesn't bring happiness. Because a lot of people think, and Will Smith wrote this in his autobiography, he said, when I was young and broke, I had a dream that one day I'll be rich and famous. But then when I became rich and famous, I didn't have a dream anymore. I achieved it, but I was still miserable. I had nothing. And that's when he kind of had this breakdown, and he seems like he's dealing with some stuff right now. And I think that's the key is, it's one thing if someone tells you, hey, money's not going to make you happy. But it's another thing if you actually make a whole bunch of money and you realize that this isn't, when I look back at my wealthiest when I was in my 20s, what did I do at the weekend? I went to the gym and I worked out 2 or 3 times a day on Saturday and twice a day on Sunday, because that's what I love to do. And I was trying to pursue that. Money didn't change me, but it just gave me the freedom to do that. And I think that's such a good message to give to people is, if you have negative views on money, try to evaluate where that came from, and to realize that money is just a tool, and you can't do anything great if you don't have any money. If you're struggling to pay the bills and you're stressed about, how you're going to put food on the table, you're not going to be a happy person. You're just not going to be. So I think that I'm very passionate about the philosophy of money.
Hmm. Yeah, and one of the terms that you used just in this little bit that we've been talking is chasing money. And my wife and I have had this conversation. I've had this conversation with a few of my friends of saying anything that you're trying to chase down means that it's running away from you. And so we don't want to be that kind of person where the things we want most are repelling repelling
Yes.
away from us. And so one of the reasons also they call it currency is because it flows. And so, in our mindset and attitude, we can attract or we can repel, whether it's people or it's health or finances, other things like that. So, of course, the Bible says that we're snared by the words of our tongue, and so we always, it's so good to choose the right word and to understand that if we're chasing something, that means, whoa, well, hey, this is chasing is different than hunting. Right? Hunting is like baiting, waiting, knowing the patterns. Where's it going to be? And I'm going to intercept its path. And chasing, you're just like, I don't know where I'm going. I think I want that over there. And so I guess I'm going to run there. And then it's over there. And so anyway, there you go, ladies and gentlemen.
No, I absolutely love that, because there is real power in words, isn't there? And
Mhm.
I love the fact you picked that up. And I think the older I get, the more I try to be precise with my language and talk about things like, this is going to be great when it happens, not, well, I hope it happens. There's so much power in words and language.
Yes. Oh, yeah. The power of words. Boy, oh boy, we could talk for hours on that. But one thing that has a lot of words is your book, The Forgotten Asset Class. So let's talk a little bit about that. Now, the title suggests that there's maybe something that investors are missing. What exactly do you think is the overlooked opportunity? And why do you believe there's that low risk and high reward that so many people are looking for?
So I look at myself and I realize that I come from a finance background. I got this MBA that taught about, investing in stocks and bonds and different portfolios. And then I was always a big reader, and I'd read all these financial books, and you'd hear about investing in property, but I was never exposed to it. And I was thinking, why is that? That's so weird. I became exposed to it because my good friend in my old apartment building, we, he got a dog and I had a dog, and I would meet him at the dog park sometimes and we'd just get chatting. And he said to me, there's so much money in real estate, in development, in flipping. And he said, it's this crazy business model. And I would just start chatting to him. And he ended up being my mentor when I changed careers. He was an attorney and he didn't really like law very much. So he's like, I'm going to set up a real estate office. And so he set up this, and we started working together. And that was over 10 years ago. And he actually just, we merged with a bigger company because he wanted to focus on some other things. Now he's working, doing this, some estate planning in Vegas now. But he was the best man at my wedding, and he's such a wonderful guy. And just talking to him, I realized that real estate, if invested properly, there's so many different ways you make money. If you invest in a stock, it can either go up or down, or it can not really go anywhere. But with real estate, if you have tenants in a building, and even if you're not making cash, you can be making cash flow. That's one way to make money. But even if you don't make cash flow, if the building appreciates 3 to 5% a year, you're going to make that. But you're actually going to make more than that because you're only buying with typically 20 to 25%. So you have leverage on top of that. Then you have every month your tenants are paying down your loan. So you have debt pay down. It's another way you're making money. So it's these ways you're making money without actually realizing it. So that's the way to generate wealth is, if you get the money straight away, it's easy to spend it. But if it's kind of behind the scenes and your loan's going down as your building's going up, that's the way to create wealth is by having these assets that over time work for you. But the biggest thing for most people is all the tax benefits that the US tax code was written to incentivize people to own property. And the crazy thing is, there's so many write-offs you can get from real estate. But the crazy thing is, Michael, is um, if you're renting your place, you're not actually neutral real estate. You're negative real estate if you hope one day to have a house. So you have to own the property you live in to be neutral. And to be an investor, you actually have to have two properties. You have to have the property you have, and then you have to have a rental property. So it's just a random chance of fate that I ended up being in the Midwest when I changed careers, because the Midwest is an area where people all around the country invest in the Midwest because it's very steady and it doesn't go up like the coast can have a year, after COVID, everyone's moving to Austin. I think Austin and Florida, the prices doubled in 18 months or something crazy. Then they had a pullback. They're so volatile. Midwest real estate is slow and steady. It just creeps up, creeps up, creeps up. It tends to give good cash flow. And it's been this wonderful, I always think how interesting it is that I changed career and my niche is working with developers and real estate projects and things. But I live in a state where I have investors that invest here from all over the country, California, New York, New Jersey, Florida, Texas. I have clients in all those states that want to invest here. And that's one of my niches is I help them, build a portfolio and have a property management group. And so I wrote that book because I'd always have these people say, "Hey, is there a book that you can recommend on real estate investing?" And I was like, "There's not really one." So I think I'm going to write one. So I ended up writing it with a good friend of mine. Shout out to my friend Brad, who's one of my good clients. And he did a lot of the kind of the numbers and the analytics, and I talked more about the philosophy of money and some of the things we were talking about, because that's really what I'm passionate about is, what are we even doing this for? I think we should really think about, why do we want money? What are we trying to buy with it? Things like
Right.
that.
Oh, absolutely. And I do want to ask you about the investment portfolios too, because that's very interesting. And ladies and gentlemen, neither one of us is selling anything. We are
Yeah.
talking about Lawrence's book. What do you hope that people take away from your book?
Honestly, it's the philosophy of the option of real estate. And I mean, I was talking to a financial advisor a couple of days ago, and he said, you can invest in so many different things. He said, I'm an older guy. Most older financial people are not pro Bitcoin. He's like, I love Bitcoin too. Like, I love all these different assets. He said, but if you want to eventually have a house, you have to buy real estate now because it only is going up and to the right, and it's just going to keep going that direction. So I think just trying to, I guess that my hope is that there's so much talk of investing in crypto, investing in the stock market. I want to just tell people that real estate is a bit more complicated because, you have to decide where you're investing. Is it a good place to invest? Are their returns good? Is it going to have some appreciation? Is it dangerous? Can I get the loan? There's a few, it's a bit harder than just opening up a Robinhood account and buying a stock or something.
Yeah.
So there's a
Right.
bit more friction. And so that's why I wanted to talk about it. If you go through the headaches of it, the payoff is there because almost the, one great thing was when 2020 happened and the world shut down, I'd been talking about real estate for a long time. And I was like, okay, let's see if all the stuff I've been saying, we're living through a once in a lifetime, once in a century kind of thing where the world shuts down, the Western world shut down. I mean, wild times. Am I going to see a building that I think was worth 800,000 suddenly sell for 500? Am I going to have all my tenants suddenly stop paying rent? Let's see how this business model works. And it was incredible. We saw minor discounts. There would be a building that might sell for 800 in 2019. And I was closing buildings in the middle of the pandemic where I'm driving in Chicago and there's no one on the road, driving to closings. Things were still happening. And it was maybe a 5% discount. It was unbelievable. All my tenants, pretty much, I had a couple of commercial tenants that didn't pay for a few months. And then they started paying again. All my residential tenants, not one of them, I didn't have one tenant miss a payment. So it was an incredible time. And it was really great because it showed the resilience of my beliefs in why investing in real estate is such a good business model.
Right. Well, I think we're piquing some people's interest. So even though I have a few more questions for you, we got some time left, but how can people get in touch with you?
Oh, thank you. The best thing is my name, Lawrence Dunning on LinkedIn. You can shoot me a message and I put a lot of real estate stuff on there, but I'm pretty easy to find. You can Google my name and I'll come up and I love talking to people. I'm really, like we talked about, I feel for people that don't have good financial education and they're struggling. I really do. My heart goes out to people because we live in a system that is basically rigged against us. If you look at the purchasing power of the dollar since Nixon came off the gold standard 52 years ago, it's just every year it's eroding some of its purchasing power. And that's really ramped up the last 5 years. Ever since COVID, they added 40% of all the dollars in circulation have been added the last 5 years. So we're living in pretty crazy times. And I think it's just I'm so passionate about trying to help people survive these times, because like I said, if we lived in a place with no debasement of currency, you wouldn't even have to invest really. You could keep cash, under the bed in a box, and you'll be okay because it wouldn't erode its purchasing power. But when you're losing even a couple, the Federal Reserve, their mandate is 2% a year. If you're losing 2% a year, that means in a generation and a half, you've lost everything's, gone to zero pretty much. But it's a lot more than that. Things have pretty much doubled since 2020. So that's more like 20% a year. So I just think having the knowledge of what are the options. Chicago, you can buy a 4-unit building for close to under $1 million. You can use an FHA loan with only 3.5% down. You can get seller credits. You can almost buy a building with zero down. It's incredible. And there's these tricks you can learn about how to get on the real estate ladder with very little cash. So I think it's just trying to spread that knowledge. Knowledge is power. And when it comes to finances, I've spent a lifetime learning. And when I was talking to that CPA I told you about a few days ago, he was teaching me about things. He was like, Lawrence, like your son's going to be 5. Why is he not a member of the business already? Why have you not got him a credit card? So he's building his credit history. All these things. I didn't think about that, So I think just having these conversations, spreading the knowledge. If there's one thing that someone gets from this conversation, just it's piquing their curiosity, like realizing there's things they don't understand. One of my superpowers is I'm so aware of what I don't know. I know there's so many things I don't know, and I want to keep learning. I want to spend a lifetime learning because there's so much knowledge out there, and I'm greedy to learn all of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's wonderful. And I know that there are members of the audience where their curiosity is piqued. And I got to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the final chapter in your book has not been written. It's not too late. And I do want you to get in touch with Lawrence because not just because he's a great guy and he's a skilled orator and he's written some books and he's had some financial success, but there's things he knows that he can help you with that you may not be aware of. And it is possible, just like he was talking about the FAH loans and the seller credit and things like that. It is possible. The American dream is still in existence. It's still there. And so, ladies and gentlemen, if you've been a little forlorn and wondering what you're going to do with the rest of your life, there are things that Lawrence can help you with. So in that vein, Lawrence, if somebody came to you, let's say they had a small inheritance, let's say $50,000. We're spitballing here, ladies and gentlemen, and they're like, we know we need to do something different, and something that I talk about on this show is uncommon efforts give us uncommon results, and so people might say, man, I've been doing exactly the same thing for the last 20 years and I'm not getting a different result. And you guys are piquing my curiosity. So, Lawrence, how can I take this first and second step towards doing something different for not just my future, but my family's future?
So again, this is not a financial advice podcast. So I think you have to ask yourself, do you want to be more aggressive and really try to get some upside, or do you want to be a bit more conservative and protect your principal? And so that's a question. Like me personally, even though I'm older, it tends to be when you're young, you tend to be very aggressive with your investments. As you get older, you get more conservative. I don't know what it is, but I love being aggressive. So if it was me, a lot of people say, that the S&P is close to all-time highs, and it's basically just being run by 9 big tech stocks. Pretty much they make up all the gains this year. We're on the cusp of an AI revolution that I think is huge, and I think the other revolution we're on the cusp of is Bitcoin is being adopted by central banks, and we now have a president his team is very pro Bitcoin. So I think Bitcoin's going to have a really great run the next few years too. That's probably that is the best performing asset of the last decade. And if I have to make a bet, I would imagine it might be the next one. Maybe Tesla with, all these robots that are coming out. It's going to be wild the next few years. So that would be the more aggressive advice for someone is to do something like that. But, they're incredibly volatile. And the reason they go up so much is because they have these big pullbacks, and tech stocks and Bitcoin are incredibly volatile. If you want something more stable, you could go for some kind of, dividend stock ETF, or you could look at real estate. And real estate depends on where you live, and it also depends on if you want to live in it. If you want to live if you want to buy a property where you're living there and then you're renting out, say it's a 2-unit building, you live in a unit, you rent the other one out. There's all these loans. There's loans sometimes where you can buy with zero down, depending on the different. Well, but that would be something that's much more conservative. But are you at a stage in your life where you want to be a landlord and you want to live in the building? And, some people say, I don't want to do that. I'd rather wait till I have enough money to buy it as a pure investment, but that's going to demand more capital. So I think the best thing you can do is figure out a game plan. It's kind of like when I started with jiu-jitsu, my first jiu-jitsu match, I remember we started and I was like, what do I do? And then now if I was to compete tomorrow, I've had hundreds of jiu-jitsu matches. So I know exactly my strategy. I have my A game. And if that doesn't work, I have my B game. And if that doesn't work, I have my desperate hell. I got to go for my C game. I'm in real
Yeah.
trouble now, but I'll do my best. But I have all of those in my head. And so I think it's really important with investments is to try to figure out, before you figure out what is the perfect investment, you have to figure out what's more important to you. And I think that's what's so beautiful. And this is great advice for life. You know, what is the perfect life for you is not going to be the perfect life for me. We have to decide what our most important core values are, and then try to craft a life that aligns with that. And I think it's the same with investments. Like, I don't want to invest in something, like I don't want to invest in drugs, tobacco, and alcohol if it would make money, because that's not aligned with what I'm about. I love Bitcoin personally, because Bitcoin is decentralized currency. And there's a lot of countries where if you're in Turkey or if you're in Venezuela and you have, 100% inflation, if you can put your money in Bitcoin, you're going to survive. And if you can't, you're going to lose everything. So I think I love the idea of investing something that I believe in. And I think and I love investing in real estate, and I love doing these developments because I can take a rundown block on the Chicago South Side and I see, I've got all these projects going. You see these beautiful new construction buildings on a vacant rundown lot that's just, houses are boarded up, and it's just so depressing. And then you see it 3 years later and you have a couple of beautiful rehabs, you have a couple of new construction homes, you've got some developments going on. It's beautiful to see the blocks change. So I love investing in that, because I get a pride of ownership of seeing, I end up selling them. It's not like I keep them forever. Or if I do keep them, I'm a good landlord. I'm not a slum landlord. I'm doing a good job. I'm upkeeping. It's not just about making money, but it's about ultimately, when all's said and done, I want to be proud of the person I am and proud of the mark I make in the world. So I think if you can align your investments to your personality and what's important to you, your core values, I think that's really wonderful advice.
Well, that's great. And thank you also for the legalese. This isn't a financial advice podcast, ladies and gentlemen. To purely entertainment and conversation between two friends. And you guys too. We're all friends, community, all that good stuff. So as we're getting close to wrapping up, I want to touch on your podcast called Enter the Lionheart. What does that concept of having a Lionheart mean to you, and how do you identify it in others?
So that actually comes from my nickname. So on my second professional fight, it was a 15-minute war back and forth, and the first 10 seconds, he throws a punch that misses my nose, and it was the seam of the glove just nicked me here. And so like blood starts coming out. And so we go back and forth, blood's everywhere. So after, my coach is like, you are the Lionheart. And so he called me Larry the Lionheart. So that was my nickname when I was fighting it ever since after that. So I called it Enter the Lionheart as a play on words, because Bruce Lee's famous movie was Enter the Dragon. But it's really, I just love having these exact types of conversation where I'm inspired by you, and you've asked challenging questions and you force me to explain my philosophy for life, which makes me think about it and makes me want to be better at it. And I think you can learn so much. I've got so much out of listening to podcasts, even if it's just these, it'll be a throwaway comment by somebody, and then it'll just trigger a thought. Then I'll do research, and then you never know where things can take you. So I think I've got such a diverse group of friends between the financial world, between the athletics world, and between the real estate world and entrepreneurs, things like that. So I just love having these exact types of conversation. You're an incredible host. You really ask some really interesting, unique questions, which I've really enjoyed.
Ladies and gentlemen, what a delightful conversation with Lawrence Dunning, a trader, a fighter, an entrepreneur. You could say maybe a modern day Renaissance man. So, Lawrence, thank you so much for sharing your journey with such authenticity and wisdom. Your story has been a good one.
I really appreciate you, Michael. Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget to touch base with Lawrence. He's got a lot going on, and a rising tide raises all boats. And as you can see, that's what he's about. If you've been inspired by Lawrence's insights and you want to hear more, of his conversations with exceptional entrepreneurs, athletes, big thinkers. I encourage you to check out Enter the Lionheart. You'll find it on Apple and other podcast players. I'm Michael Klassen. You've been listening to the 5 a.m. podcast. Please seize your days, enjoy those sunrises and sunsets, and all those delightful adventures in between. I'll see you next time on the 5 a.m. podcast. Thanks for watching the show. Just a reminder that you can get all of our resources, other episodes, and read our blog posts at 5ampodcast.com. 5 a.m. podcast is brought to you in part by MKCI.ca. That's mkci.ca. Thank you for your support of 5 a.m. podcast.